TIFU by attempting to impress my girlfriend with a surprise dinner, and nearly burning down my apartment. It all started a few weeks ago when my girlfriend, Sarah, and I celebrated our 6-month anniversary. I wanted to do something extra special for her, something that would really show her how much I cared. We've always enjoyed cooking together, so I figured I'd take it to the next level and surprise her with a homemade, multi-course meal. This was going to be perfect, she'd love it, I thought. Now, I'm not a complete disaster in the kitchen. I can cook a decent meal, but I'm no chef. I can make pasta, I can fry chicken, and I can scramble eggs like a pro. But a full-on dinner, complete with appetizers, main course, and dessert? That was a bit above my pay grade. But hey, it was for Sarah. I had to make this work. The plan was simple. I would start early in the afternoon, get everything prepped, and have the dinner ready by the time she came over that evening. I wanted it to be a full surprise. No hints, no teasing, just a complete wow factor. I figured I'd start with something easy, a simple appetizer of bruschetta. How hard could it be, right? Just toast some bread, mix some tomatoes and basil, and boom, you've got a fancy starter. I headed to the grocery store to pick up the ingredients, and while I was there, I decided to get a little fancy with the main course. I wasn't just going to cook a regular dinner. No, I was going to make a French dish, coq au vin. It sounded sophisticated, and I was certain it would impress her. Sure, I'd never actually cooked anything like it before, but I had watched a few YouTube tutorials. What could possibly go wrong? Fast forward a couple of hours, and I was back in my apartment, staring at my kitchen full of groceries. I set up the counter with all the ingredients, feeling like a 5-star chef in my own home. I started with the bruschetta. Easy, right? Well, let's just say the first mistake of the day came when I accidentally set the toaster to the highest setting possible. I didn't realize this at first, so I set the bread in and went about prepping the tomatoes. About 5 minutes later, I heard a weird smell wafting through the kitchen. I turned around and saw smoke coming out of the toaster. I panicked and rushed over, grabbing the toast with a pair of tongs. But by the time I had pulled it out, it was so burnt that it looked like charcoal. I cursed under my breath. Okay, no big deal, I thought. I've got this. I threw the charred toast into the trash, grabbed a fresh loaf of bread, and started again. This time, I kept a close eye on the toaster. I moved on to the tomatoes and basil, making sure everything was finely chopped and ready to go. The bruschetta came together pretty well, and I thought it was finally time to tackle the main course. Now, I should have known better than to attempt a complicated dish like coq au vin. I had read the recipe, watched the tutorial, and made a mental checklist of everything I needed. But of course, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had to brown the chicken first, then add the wine and let it simmer for over an hour. Seems simple enough, right? Except that I didn't quite anticipate how long it would take to get everything to the right temperature, and I didn't account for how much noise my apartment's tiny kitchen would make. As I began to brown the chicken, the kitchen started to get hotter and hotter. The oil in the pan was popping and splattering, and I started to sweat. It was fine, though, I told myself. I could handle it. The wine was added, and I set the pot on the stove to simmer. This is when things started to go off the rails. While I waited for the coq au vin to cook, I decided to start on the dessert. I figured I could whip up something simple, maybe chocolate mousse. I had everything for it, and it seemed like it would be a crowd pleaser. I didn't realize that by trying to multitask, I was setting myself up for failure. I got the mousse started, but as I was whipping the cream, I noticed that the chicken dish was starting to boil over. I ran back to the stove, but it was too late. The liquid had spilled over the pot and was now sizzling on the stove, creating a terrible smell of burning wine and oil. I frantically grabbed a spatula and tried to push the food back into the pot, but the heat was intense, and I had already let it cook too long. It wasn't looking good. In my panic, I knocked over the bowl of whipped cream. It spilled everywhere. Chocolate mousse, which had been so simple in my mind, was now all over the counter, the floor, and the stove. I cursed under my breath and turned off the heat on the chicken, hoping that I hadn't ruined the whole dish. Now, I was in full panic mode. I had no idea what to do next. The apartment was filled with the scent of burnt food, and I was covered in chocolate mousse and sweat. To make matters worse, I realized that I had completely forgotten to set the table. I hadn't even poured the wine. This was turning into a disaster. But it wasn't over yet. The final nail in the coffin came when I tried to salvage what was left of the chicken. I moved the pot off the stove, only to have the handle break off in my hand. In a split second, the entire pot tipped over, and the contents, a bubbling mess of overcooked chicken, wine, and burned oil, spilled all over the stove and onto the floor. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the disaster in front of me. It was official. I had completely ruined the dinner. There was no way I could salvage this. I'd gone from trying to be a thoughtful, romantic boyfriend to a complete kitchen catastrophe. By the time Sarah showed up, I was standing in a ruined kitchen, holding a glass of wine and trying to act like everything was fine. She walked in, took one look around, and just started laughing. It wasn't the response I was expecting, but honestly, I was too embarrassed to care at that point. "Well," she said, still laughing, "at least you tried." We ended up ordering takeout, pizza, of all things, and spent the evening eating pizza on the couch while watching Netflix. Not exactly the romantic dinner I had envisioned, but it was a good night in the end. I learned a few things that day. First, I'm never trying to cook an elaborate French dish again unless I've practiced it 100 times. Second, cooking under pressure is a recipe for disaster. And third, sometimes things go wrong, but it's not the end of the world. Sarah appreciated the effort, even if the dinner was a disaster. The next day, I went online to look up new recipes, and I think I'll stick to pasta for the time being. But hey, at least we have a funny story to tell for years to come. TLDR, tried to surprise my girlfriend with a fancy homemade dinner. Burnt everything, ruined the main course, spilled dessert everywhere, and ended up ordering pizza. Still had a great time, though. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. It all started last weekend when my friend Dave invited me to a backyard barbecue at his place. Dave and I have been friends for years, though he's always been the type to go overboard with his parties. The kind of guy who buys way too much alcohol, grills burgers until they're charred beyond recognition, and insists on setting up an inflatable bounce house in his yard for no apparent reason. Still, it's always a good time, so I agreed to go, looking forward to the weekend. When I arrived, Dave greeted me at the door with one of his signature bear hugs, his chest puffed out like he was welcoming a long-lost brother. "You made it, man. Grab a beer and let's catch up," he said enthusiastically. I smiled, shrugged off my jacket, and followed him into the backyard. The party was in full swing. There were people everywhere, some old friends, some I had never met before, laughing, drinking, and enjoying the food. Dave had outdone himself with the spread. There were grilled steaks, hot dogs, and even a bunch of ribs that smelled like they had been marinating for days. Everyone was having a great time, and I was quickly handed a cold beer, which I gladly accepted. It wasn't long before I found myself chatting with Sarah, a girl I used to work with a couple of years ago. We hit it off instantly. We talked about work, life, and, of course, the ridiculousness of Dave's parties. At some point, she mentioned that she was planning on moving to a new city soon for a job opportunity, and I made a joke about how she was escaping the chaos of Dave's place, which got a good laugh. As the evening went on, the alcohol kept flowing, and I found myself feeling more and more comfortable in the crowd. At some point, someone suggested we play a game of beer pong, which, of course, I was all in for. The teams were picked randomly, and somehow, I ended up paired with Sarah. I was a little nervous. She was clearly a much more experienced player than I was, but I didn't let it show. I was determined to hold my own. The game started, and I quickly learned that Sarah wasn't just good at beer pong, she was a master. She sank 3 cups in a row before I had even gotten one shot off, and by the time I managed to land a single ball in a cup, we were already losing by a wide margin. I laughed it off, trying to maintain my dignity, but honestly, I was a little impressed by her skills. After a few rounds, it was clear we weren't going to win. But we kept playing for fun, drinking and laughing between throws. Eventually, the game ended, and Sarah and I went to grab another round of drinks. I found myself drawn to her even more. There was something about the way she laughed, the way she seemed so at ease in a crowd. We talked for a while, and before I knew it, the sun had set, and the party was getting into full swing with music, dancing, and more drinking. Around midnight, things started to get a little hazy. I'd had more than a few beers by this point, and I wasn't exactly keeping track. The conversation between Sarah and me flowed easily, and we found ourselves sitting together by the bonfire in Dave's backyard. The fire crackled, and the flames danced in the night air. We were talking about everything, life, relationships, our dreams, when Dave came up to us, holding 2 shot glasses of something dark and suspiciously potent. "Shots," he yelled, his voice booming over the music. "Let's make this party a little more interesting." Sarah and I exchanged a look. She raised an eyebrow at me, then shrugged. "Why not?" she said, taking the shot glass from Dave. I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't a huge fan of hard liquor, but I didn't want to be the buzzkill. So, I took the shot too. The burn was immediate. Whatever Dave had poured into those glasses was stronger than anything I had expected. My head swam a little, but I laughed it off, trying to play it cool. The night was still young, and I was determined to keep up with everyone else. That's when everything started to go wrong. A few minutes after the shot, I began to feel strange. My vision blurred, and I suddenly felt lightheaded. I thought maybe I was just a little too drunk, but the feeling wasn't passing. In fact, it was getting worse. I stood up too quickly, and the ground seemed to sway beneath me. I grabbed the nearest chair to steady myself, but I felt like I was about to pass out. "Whoa, you good, man?" Dave asked, his face looking concerned. But all I could do was nod weakly. "I'm fine," I mumbled, trying to shake off the dizziness. But it wasn't working. My stomach began to churn, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Without warning, I bolted toward the bathroom, my legs shaky beneath me. The door to the bathroom was already occupied, so I leaned against the wall, clutching my stomach. I wasn't sure if I was going to throw up or pass out. It felt like the room was spinning faster and faster. A moment later, Sarah appeared at my side. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her expression serious. "Hey, are you okay? You don't look good." I think I started, but before I could finish my sentence, the door to the bathroom swung open, and out stumbled Dave, looking equally as disheveled as I felt. Man, I think I overdid it with the shots," he muttered, holding his stomach. "That stuff was," he cut himself off as he noticed me swaying. And then it hit me. I wasn't the only one who had been feeling off. The shot was something more than just alcohol. I could barely stay on my feet, and Dave, who was usually the life of the party, looked like he was about to collapse. I pushed past him into the bathroom, barely managing to close the door before I fell to my knees and threw up everything I'd consumed in the last few hours. The sensation was overwhelming, hot, sour, and terrible. I lost track of how long I was in there, but at some point, Sarah knocked on the door and told me I should probably lie down for a bit. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, Dave was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. I asked him what had happened with the shots, and he just groaned, "I think I grabbed the wrong bottle." That was a mix of vodka and some crazy moonshine I've been saving for a special occasion. We both sat there in silence for a while, nursing our collective hangovers. The party continued around us, but it felt like everything had come to a standstill for me. Sarah came by later and checked in, offering me some water and ibuprofen, which I gratefully accepted. I'd learned my lesson. Dave's shots should have come with a warning label. But the worst part? Sarah never came back. She left soon after I recovered enough to stand, and I haven't heard from her since. In the end, I ended up getting a bit of a reputation at the party for almost passing out on the couch, but at least I got to learn the hard way not to trust Dave's special concoctions. So, in case you're wondering, the moral of the story is, never, ever trust a guy who thinks mixing moonshine with vodka is a good idea. TIFU by accidentally revealing a huge secret at my cousin's wedding. So, a little backstory. I come from a pretty close-knit family, but we're also a bit dramatic. My cousins, aunt, and uncle are all super involved in each other's lives, and that means lots of family get-togethers. This time, the occasion was my cousin Claire's wedding. Claire's always been the favorite cousin, pretty, charismatic, a bit of a perfectionist. She's the one everyone dotes on, and I'm the slightly awkward cousin who's usually the one in the background. No big deal, it's just the way things are. The wedding itself was planned to perfection, like everything in her life. She'd spent months organizing every detail. The venue was beautiful, a sprawling vineyard with a massive barn for the reception. The ceremony was classy, yet intimate. Of course, it was the most talked about event of the season. I mean, my entire family had been gossiping about it for weeks. Now, where I really screwed up is that I have a bit of a history with weddings. It's not a bad history, per se, but I have a tendency to overshare things when I get a bit nervous. So, naturally, I was already feeling the pressure just being there, trying not to stand out or mess up in any way. Everything was going smoothly during the ceremony. Claire looked radiant as she walked down the aisle in a stunning gown, and I managed to hold back my tears barely. I was seated in the third row, to the side, so I didn't have any real responsibility. Just there to watch, smile, and avoid awkward situations. But as the ceremony wrapped up, it was time for the reception. The reception was held inside the big barn, which was beautifully decorated with twinkling fairy lights, white tablecloths, and flower arrangements everywhere. Claire and her new husband, Brad, were introduced to the crowd, and everyone cheered and clapped as they entered. The drinks were flowing, and the music started playing. The buffet was set up with a wide variety of food, and guests were starting to mingle, grabbing plates and glasses. I went over to the buffet with my parents. We were chatting about how beautiful the ceremony had been when my cousin Mia, who's a bit of a wild card in our family, pulled me aside. Mia has always been a troublemaker in the best way. She's the one who can always be counted on for the most outrageous comments at family dinners and the one who seems to know everyone's business. Honestly, I love her for it, but I knew this wouldn't be a conversation about anything too innocent. She looked at me with a mischievous grin and pulled me to the side of the barn, away from the crowd. "Hey, you want to hear something wild?" she asked, clearly excited. I could already tell it was going to be some scandalous gossip, and I was curious. So, Brad, Claire's new husband, he used to date Claire's maid of honor. My eyes widened. Mia wasn't wrong, that was wild. Claire's maid of honor, Jenna, was this bubbly and charming girl who had been Claire's best friend since childhood. The idea that Brad had been involved with her before marrying Claire seemed, insane. Jenna had never mentioned anything about this in front of us, but I guess it made sense now why she and Brad were so awkward together during the whole ceremony. There was definitely a weird tension between them. Mia, however, seemed to find it all too hilarious. They broke up pretty badly, too. Like, a nasty, dramatic thing, Mia added, practically vibrating with excitement. I heard it was because Brad was cheating on her with Claire for months before they got together. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. It's a mess. I stood there in shock, completely stunned by this revelation. I had no idea what to say, but Mia's grin was practically evil. Of course, being the curious person I am, I was tempted to ask more questions, but I didn't want to seem too interested. Instead, I muttered something along the lines of "whoa, that's insane," and tried to move on from the conversation. But then, the worst thing happened. As I walked back to the buffet with my plate of food in hand, my dad pulled me aside. "Hey, sweetie, I just wanted to tell you how great you're doing tonight," he said, beaming with pride. "You've been so good about staying out of the spotlight. We're all proud of you." I nodded, feeling like a decent human being for once in my life. It was one of those rare moments where my dad was actually being kind and not making awkward comments about my life choices. I was just about to say something back when he leaned in closer, as if about to reveal some great wisdom. "You know," he began in his usual serious tone, "I heard some rumors about Claire's wedding. Apparently, Brad was a little bit of a player in his younger years. A lot of the girls in our family are talking about it." He chuckled. "Imagine Claire doesn't know about all his past relationships." My eyes went wide again. Was my dad talking about what Mia had just told me? No way. Surely not. But before I could process that, I heard a familiar voice from behind me. "Are you talking about me?" It was Claire's voice. She was right behind me, with Brad, Jenna, and some other family members in tow. I turned around and saw her standing there, smiling a little too brightly. No, I was just telling your cousin here how happy I am for you," my dad said quickly, backing away. I was frozen. I had no idea what to do or say. I was already feeling awkward because of the conversation with Mia, and now it seemed like Claire had overheard my dad talking about it. Was this the perfect moment to just apologize and pretend I didn't know anything? Or would that make everything worse? Claire looked me straight in the eye. "I heard what Mia said," she said, her smile fading just a little. "It's okay if you want to talk about it. You know, about Brad and his exes." And that's when my brain short-circuited. I blurted out, without thinking, "Wait, so you do know about Brad and Jenna? And everything that happened before the wedding?" The entire group froze. Jenna's eyes widened. Brad's face turned as red as a tomato. Claire just stared at me, shocked. "Wait, you didn't know?" I asked, a bit louder now. "I thought everyone knew." "Mia, shut up," Mia hissed from behind me, but it was too late. Claire's expression went from shock to confusion, then to something darker, and the atmosphere immediately went from joyous to awkward. It was like a bomb had gone off in the middle of the reception. As it turned out, Claire did know. But no one had expected her to hear it from me. Brad's past, Jenna's involvement, the whole drama, it was a secret everyone had been keeping from her, and I'd just completely wrecked it by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. The rest of the night was a blur. Claire's perfect wedding turned into an uncomfortable mess, with people whispering and glaring at each other. Brad and Jenna disappeared for most of the evening, while Claire tried to keep her composure. I ended up leaving early because I couldn't handle the awkwardness. So yeah, TIFU by accidentally exposing a huge family secret at my cousin's wedding. Now I'm the villain in the story, and I don't think I'll be invited to any more family events for a while. But hey, at least I'll never have to hear about how perfect Claire's life is ever again. So, I thought I was being the most thoughtful and romantic boyfriend ever. My girlfriend and I had been dating for about 2 years, and I really wanted to do something special for her. I had been hearing her talk about how much she missed the cozy dinner dates we used to have when we first started dating, so I decided that I would surprise her by recreating one of those perfect, intimate nights in the comfort of our home. I'm not the greatest cook, but I thought to myself, how hard can it be to make pasta and a nice little appetizer? I watched a couple of YouTube tutorials, got all the ingredients, and even picked up a nice bottle of wine. I was feeling pretty confident, not gonna lie. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It was supposed to be a surprise, so I told her I was going to be out for a bit, running errands, which gave me a window of a few hours to set everything up. I got home early, started cooking, and laid out candles on the dining table, made sure everything was clean, and even put on some nice music to set the mood. I was proud of myself for pulling this off. I figured I had everything under control. The first thing I wanted to do was make garlic bread as an appetizer. I had seen people make it in the oven, so I preheated the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and threw the bread in with some butter and garlic. I left it in there for what seemed like the perfect amount of time based on the recipe. At least that's what I thought. I was busy chopping up ingredients for the pasta when I started to smell something burning. I quickly rushed over to the kitchen and opened the oven door, and to my horror, the garlic bread had turned into a black, charred, smoking brick. I panicked and pulled it out of the oven, setting it on the counter. The smoke started billowing out, and I quickly opened the windows, trying to air out the room. My heart was racing. This was not how I imagined the evening going. But, I thought, it's just an appetizer, no big deal. I could still salvage the night, right? Wrong. I now had a blackened pile of bread sitting on the counter, but that was the least of my worries. I had promised myself that I would make a homemade marinara sauce to go with the pasta. I found a recipe online, and it seemed simple enough: tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and herbs. I was feeling good about it. I got a pot, poured in some oil, and began sautéing the garlic. I tossed in the tomatoes and started stirring. The recipe said to cook it for 20 minutes, so I set a timer and went to check on the pasta. I was feeling pretty relaxed for a moment, thinking that everything would come together. But as I was stirring the pasta in boiling water, I heard a faint popping sound. I turned around, and smoke was pouring from the pot where I was making the sauce. The oil had started to splatter everywhere, and the tomatoes were beginning to burn. I was in full panic mode at this point. The smoke detector started going off, which only added to the chaos. I grabbed the pot with my oven mitts and tried to move it to a cooler burner. I knocked over a bunch of cooking utensils, and somehow, I spilled the entire pot of marinara all over the stovetop. At this point, the kitchen was a disaster. Smoke everywhere, the smell of burnt food filling the house, and now marinara sauce splattered all over the stove. I couldn't even begin to describe the mess. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. My girlfriend would be home soon, and I had nothing to show for my efforts except a kitchen that looked like it had just been through a war zone. But I wasn't giving up yet. I knew I had to at least salvage the main course, so I decided to boil the pasta and just dump some store-bought sauce on top to make it look like I had it together. I boiled the water, added the pasta, and as I was straining it in the sink, I had an accident with the colander. The entire pot of pasta slipped out of my hands, and it all spilled onto the floor. I was standing there, staring at the pasta scattered across the kitchen floor, and I just couldn't believe what was happening. I could already hear my girlfriend coming in the front door. My heart dropped. I quickly grabbed some of the pasta, tried to salvage whatever I could, and dumped it onto the plates. At this point, I had no time to fix anything, so I ran to the table, lit the candles, and hoped she wouldn't notice that everything was wrong. When she walked in, she looked at the table, smiled, and said, "This looks lovely." But when she got closer and saw the burnt garlic bread, the chaotic mess in the kitchen, and the unappetizing plates of pasta, her smile faded. I could feel the weight of her disappointment. I knew she didn't want to say anything, but I could tell she was trying not to laugh at the disaster I had created. She sat down at the table, and we tried to make the best of it. We ate the pasta, which was, of course, bland and underseasoned. The garlic bread was basically inedible, but we both picked at it, pretending it was fine. I apologized profusely, telling her how much I wanted everything to be perfect and how badly it had gone wrong. She told me it was sweet that I tried, and that the effort meant more to her than the actual meal. She laughed it off, but I could tell she was a little bit disappointed. We ended up ordering takeout, which turned out to be the best decision of the night. The evening wasn't exactly what I had hoped for, but we did end up having a nice time together, laughing about how much of a disaster the whole thing had been. It wasn't the romantic dinner I had envisioned, but it was a reminder that sometimes the thought and effort count more than the outcome. In the end, I learned a few things. I'm never going to cook a fancy dinner again without practicing first, and I will definitely be checking every recipe more thoroughly before I try anything new. Most importantly, I learned that even when things don't go as planned, the people who care about you will appreciate the effort anyway. Even if it means dealing with charred bread, burnt sauce, and pasta all over the floor. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills, and ended up setting the kitchen on fire, nearly ruining my relationship. Let me set the stage. I, at 26, am a decent cook. Not a culinary genius or anything, but I can follow a recipe and pull off a few impressive dishes. Over the years, I've gotten good at making the basics, pastas, grilled meats, stir-fries, and so on. But I always had this dream of cooking a perfect, fancy meal for a woman I was interested in. Enter Rachel, 24, the cute girl from my office. We've been friendly for a while, and I've always been a little into her, though I never really did anything about it because, well, I'm a coward. For months, we exchanged casual texts, shared a few laughs during lunch breaks, and hung out at the office bar for happy hours, but I never made a move. A few weeks ago, things changed. Rachel mentioned that she was moving into a new apartment, and I saw my chance. It wasn't much, but I decided that I would offer to cook her dinner as a housewarming gift. I figured this would show off my cooking skills, and, if I'm being honest, I was hoping it would also show her that I could be a fun and reliable guy. You know, someone she could picture having a future with. The day of the dinner, I planned everything out. I decided on a 3-course meal, a simple appetizer of roasted red pepper hummus with pita chips, a main course of seared steak with garlic butter and roasted vegetables, and for dessert, a rich chocolate lava cake. Nothing too crazy, but I thought it was elegant enough to impress. I spent the whole afternoon prepping everything, chopping vegetables, making the hummus, and prepping the cake batter. Everything was going smoothly. I was feeling confident, even excited. This was my chance to make an impression. I just knew it would go off without a hitch. Rachel arrived at my apartment right on time, and I could tell she was already impressed by the setup. She complimented me on the decor, and I offered her a drink while I finished up a few things in the kitchen. She seemed genuinely excited about the meal, which was a good sign. But looking back, I should have noticed that she was too excited. She kept asking about the meal, what I had planned, if I was sure everything was going to be perfect. At the time, I chalked it up to her being nervous. I had no idea how badly I was about to screw everything up. The first red flag was when I started the steak. I decided to sear it in a hot pan, get a nice crust on it, then finish it in the oven. Simple, right? Well, I didn't realize the pan was way too hot. As soon as I dropped the steaks in, they sizzled way more aggressively than I expected. Within seconds, there was a thick cloud of smoke rising from the pan. I tried to stay calm and rushed to open a window, but of course, the smoke alarm went off. Loudly. I tried to silence the alarm, but it just kept screeching. Rachel, being the trooper she is, tried to make light of it, saying, "Well, that's one way to impress a girl, huh?" I laughed it off, but inside, I was starting to panic. I was halfway through cooking this meal, and everything was spiraling out of control. I turned the steaks over and moved them to the oven, but I didn't realize the oil had splattered everywhere, and the stove top was a mess. Of course, the oil that splattered on the burner caught fire. A small flame shot up from the burner, and I froze. My heart was pounding. I could feel my face turn red, and my hands started shaking. I tried to grab a towel to smother the flame, but in my panic, I knocked over the bowl of hummus, spilling it all over the counter and floor. That was the moment I knew I was officially in over my head. Rachel, bless her, didn't freak out. She calmly told me, "Hey, you need to put the fire out. Get the fire extinguisher." I had no idea where the fire extinguisher was. My apartment was nice enough, but I wasn't exactly the most organized person in the world. I rushed around like a maniac, searching through cupboards, drawers, and under the sink. all the while, the fire on the stove was slowly growing. By the time I found the fire extinguisher, the smoke in the apartment had gotten worse, and the fire had spread a little. I sprayed the extinguisher like it was a magic wand, but instead of putting the fire out quickly, I accidentally sprayed half of the kitchen in white powder. Rachel had to move out of the way to avoid getting blasted with foam, and the entire apartment now smelled like burnt oil and chemicals. The fire was out, but so was any semblance of dignity I had left. Rachel was trying to be cool about it, but I could tell she was holding back laughter, which, honestly, was probably the best reaction I could hope for at that point. "Well, I guess dinner's off," she said, smiling through her shock. I was mortified. I apologized profusely, telling her I would clean up the mess and we could just order takeout or something. I even offered to throw the whole dinner idea out and just hang out with her, but she insisted we at least salvage something. So, we cleaned up together. As I wiped down the stove and took out the trash, Rachel quietly asked me, "Is there a reason you were so insistent on making a fancy meal tonight?" I don't know what came over me, but in a moment of complete honesty, I admitted, "I wanted to impress you, honestly. I thought I could cook something nice and show you that I can be a guy who's reliable and fun. But, clearly, I have no idea what I'm doing." Rachel paused for a moment, and then to my surprise, she started laughing, genuine, belly laughs that I hadn't heard in ages. I thought I had completely blown it, but her laughter was the kind of lightheartedness that made me realize she wasn't judging me at all. "Well," she said, "if you wanted to impress me, you did. I don't think I've ever seen someone go through such an epic cooking disaster. I didn't even know fire extinguishers could make such a mess." We ended up ordering pizza, sitting on the couch, and talking about everything except the kitchen disaster. She was funny and easy to talk to, and I felt a weird sense of relief. The date was still salvaged, and in the end, I think she was genuinely impressed by my ability to not completely lose my cool. I might have burned the steak, ruined the hummus, and almost set the apartment on fire, but at least I was able to show that I could laugh at myself. The next day at work, Rachel came up to me and said, "So, when are we going to try that dinner again? Maybe without the fire hazard this time?" I grinned and promised her that we'd make it happen, but this time, I'd probably just buy the steaks pre-cooked. We've been hanging out more since that night, and things have been going well. I don't know if that one disastrous night made her like me more or less, but I'm glad I was able to laugh it off. Maybe it's not the most glamorous way to impress someone, but it worked. And hey, I've never looked at a fire extinguisher the same way again. Moral of the story: if you're trying to impress someone with your cooking skills, maybe stick to something less flammable. Also, keep the fire extinguisher within arm's reach. TIFU, by trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills and almost burning down my apartment. It all started a few weeks ago when I met Emily at a party thrown by my roommate. We had a few drinks, chatted about our favorite movies, and discovered we had a lot in common. After the party, I added her on Instagram, and we started texting pretty regularly. A couple of days later, she sent me a message asking if I liked to cook. Now, I don't cook much, but I didn't want to come across as a total loser, so I lied and told her I loved it. At first, she was just asking general questions, like what my favorite dish was, and I kept up the charade with vague but confident answers. I told her I was great at making pasta, stir-fry, and even some fancy stuff like seared salmon. Emily seemed impressed, so I thought, hey, this is my chance to show her I'm the type of guy who can impress her with my culinary skills. A few days later, she asked if I wanted to cook dinner for her. I almost had a panic attack. Sure, I could make pasta, but there was no way I was going to serve her some microwaved spaghetti and pre-made sauce. I had to step up my game. I decided to make something fancy, like a roasted chicken with vegetables, something that screamed, "I know what I'm doing," but still seemed like I could pull it off without looking like a total idiot. So, I spent hours researching recipes. I watched YouTube videos, read blog posts, and even asked a couple of friends who knew how to cook for advice. I decided to go with a whole roasted chicken with garlic, rosemary, and lemon, served with roasted potatoes and asparagus. Nothing too complicated, right? The day arrived, and I was feeling a mixture of excitement and terror. I spent the afternoon shopping for ingredients, and by the time I got home, I felt like a professional chef. The chicken was looking good, the veggies were prepped, and I was all set. But as soon as I started putting everything in the oven, things started going wrong. First, I realized I had misjudged the cooking time. I had thought it would take about 45 minutes to roast the chicken, but it turned out I had to cook it for over an hour. Fine, no big deal, I thought, just let it cook a little longer. I figured I'd use the extra time to clean up and maybe even set a nice table, so I started wiping down the counters and putting the dishes away. But then, I noticed something strange. There was a faint smell of burning. I opened the oven door to check on the chicken, and to my horror, I saw smoke billowing out. The skin of the chicken had turned a deep, crispy black, and the potatoes were completely charred. In my panic, I forgot to turn the oven off, so the smoke kept pouring out, and the whole apartment started to smell like burnt rubber. Emily was supposed to arrive in about 30 minutes. I had no backup plan, no takeout menu, and no clue what to do. I stood there frozen, staring at the smoking disaster in my oven. The whole apartment was filling with smoke, and I started to cough. The smoke detectors went off, which, of course, made everything worse. I rushed to the window to open it, but the smoke was so thick that it seemed like I was fighting a losing battle. I ran over to the oven and tried to salvage what I could. I yanked the chicken out, but it was too late, it looked like a charcoal briquette at this point. The potatoes were also completely ruined, and the asparagus looked like it had been left in a sauna for hours. There was no way I could serve any of this. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted Emily, telling her that I had encountered a minor kitchen accident and needed a little extra time. She seemed understanding, but I knew I had messed up big time. I was trying to figure out what to do next when my roommate came home. He walked in, saw the smoke, and immediately started laughing. He asked what the hell happened, and I told him the whole story, how I was trying to impress a girl, and now I had destroyed the meal and possibly my reputation as a functioning adult. He was a bit of a disaster in the kitchen himself, but he could at least make pasta. So, he tried to help me salvage the situation. We decided to throw everything out, open all the windows, and air out the place before Emily arrived. I quickly started texting her, telling her that dinner was going to be a bit of a reboot. I promised her that I was still trying to put something together and that I had a surprise dessert ready. With the oven off and the smoke cleared, I ran to the store again. This time, I grabbed frozen pizza, some salad mix, and a store-bought cheesecake. Basically, I was now on plan B with no shame. When I came back, I quickly set the table and opened a bottle of wine. I texted Emily to let her know I was back on track, and she told me she was on her way. When she arrived, the apartment was finally smoke-free, and I was desperately trying to hide my embarrassment. We sat down, and I poured the wine, trying to play it cool. She took a bite of the pizza and looked at me, a little puzzled. She asked what happened to the roasted chicken, and I made some excuse about technical difficulties. I was hoping she wouldn't ask for more details, but of course, she did. I couldn't lie any longer. I told her everything, the burned chicken, the panic, the smoke detectors, the whole fiasco. Emily laughed, and honestly, it was the best reaction I could have hoped for. She said it was one of the funniest things she'd ever heard and that I definitely earned some major points for trying so hard. She even complimented the frozen pizza, which, I'll admit, was a relief. The evening went surprisingly well. We ended up spending the night talking and laughing, and Emily seemed to appreciate the effort I put into the evening, even if the results were a little less than perfect. After that, we hung out a few more times, and eventually, I managed to cook an actual decent meal for her, with a little help from YouTube, of course. Looking back, it was definitely a huge failure. But it was also kind of a win, in a way. I learned that trying to impress someone by pretending to be something you're not is never a good idea, and that honesty, even when you're a mess, can still go a long way. Plus, it gave us both something to laugh about for a long time. Moral of the story: If you're ever trying to impress someone with your cooking skills, just stick with something you know. Or, order takeout and skip the whole disaster altogether. TIFU by accidentally sending my best friend a text meant for my therapist, and now she thinks I'm dealing with a serious crisis. I've always prided myself on being organized. I have a calendar for everything, a to-do list for everything, and I always double-check every text before sending it. Usually, I'm very careful about these things, especially when it comes to sensitive topics. But yesterday, I royally messed up. It all started when I had my weekly therapy session. I've been going to therapy for a few months now, dealing with some anxiety and stress from work, and just life in general. My therapist, Dr. Jensen, is great. She's kind and listens without judgment. We've been working through different techniques to help me cope with stress and process emotions better. But I hadn't had the chance to tell anyone in my personal life about how deep I've been going into these topics, except for my friend, Emily. I've known Emily for years. We met in college and have been inseparable ever since. We've been through everything together, graduations, breakups, promotions, all that stuff. She's practically family. But even though she's my closest friend, I never really shared too much with her about the deeper stuff, like therapy. It's not that I didn't trust her, it's just, I don't know. I felt like she might judge me or not understand. So, I kept the heavy stuff to myself. Anyway, back to yesterday. After my session with Dr. Jensen, I had a particularly rough day. We'd been talking about some very emotional things, and I was feeling vulnerable and exhausted. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot after the session, trying to calm myself down, when I remembered that I had promised Emily that I would catch up with her later. So, I started typing a message to her, just like I always do when I want to vent. But here's where I made my mistake. I had my therapy notes open on my phone, and they were fresh in my mind. Instead of texting Emily, I accidentally sent a message meant for Dr. Jensen. It read, "Hey, Dr. Jensen, I'm really struggling today. The panic attacks have been so much worse, and I don't know how to handle all this. I'm afraid I might spiral back into the dark place I was a few months ago. I feel like no one can help me, and I'm so tired of pretending everything is fine. I can't seem to shake this feeling of impending doom." I didn't realize the mistake until I saw the tiny, gray text pop up at the top of my screen that said, "Message sent to Emily." My heart dropped. I had just sent something that was way too personal and way too raw to my best friend, and I hadn't even meant to send it to her. Immediately, I tried to call her to explain, but the phone just rang and rang. Then the text bubble popped up, "Emily is typing." I started to panic. What if Emily didn't know how to respond? What if she didn't know how to handle me like this? I was on the verge of calling it all off and just leaving the country or something. But then my phone buzzed again. The text finally came through from Emily. "Holy shit, are you okay? You need to talk to me right now. I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. I'm really glad you're reaching out, but I had no idea this was going on. Please, let's talk. Do you need me to come over?" I felt a huge wave of guilt rush over me. Emily had always been there for me, but this was a lot. This was too much. I never meant for her to know this side of me. It was meant to be something I talked about with Dr. Jensen, not her. I immediately typed back, "Wait, no, that wasn't meant for you. I was texting my therapist, I swear." Emily replied within seconds, "Wait, what? That wasn't for me? Then who the hell was it for? I'm really sorry, Emily. That text was meant for Dr. Jensen. I accidentally sent it to you instead. I'm fine, I swear. It's just that we were talking about a lot of heavy stuff today." She didn't reply right away. I could tell she was processing what I'd just said. Honestly, I had no idea what she was thinking. It was one thing for her to know I was in therapy, but it was another thing for her to get a text like that out of the blue. She must have been so shocked. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily sent this. Dude, you have to tell me more about this. I had no idea you were struggling like that. Of course, I'm here for you, but you have to be honest with me. I can't help you if you don't let me. And that's when I realized what a mess I had made. Now, here's the thing. Emily is one of the most supportive people I know. She's the kind of friend who drops everything if you need her. But even with that, I was terrified that she would feel overwhelmed. I didn't want her to think that she had to fix me or somehow take on the burden of what I was going through. It wasn't her job. I just wanted to get through this on my own with the help of my therapist, not drag her into my emotional chaos. But when Emily said she was there for me, I couldn't deny that it was comforting. She was my friend, and maybe it was okay for me to let her see the raw, messy side of me. Maybe she could handle it. Maybe I didn't need to hide everything behind a wall of pride. I ended up telling her everything. I explained how I've been struggling with anxiety for months, how therapy has been helping, but also how difficult it's been for me to open up about it. I told her about the panic attacks, about the moments when I felt like I was spiraling, and how sometimes I felt like I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. To my surprise, Emily didn't judge me. She didn't pull away. She just listened, and then she said something that really stuck with me. I don't want you to feel like you have to go through this alone, but I also don't want you to think I expect you to be perfect. You don't have to hide any of this from me. You're my best friend. And I'm here, always. It was such a simple thing to say, but it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Now, I still feel a little embarrassed about accidentally sending that message. But I guess it's funny how sometimes the worst mistakes can lead to the most important conversations. I'm not saying it was ideal, but I'm glad it happened. So, yeah. TIFU by texting my best friend the kind of emotional breakdown I should have only sent to my therapist. But, in the end, I think it might have been the wake-up call I needed to finally open up about the things I've been hiding. Who knows, maybe it was just what I needed to stop pretending everything was fine. And honestly, it feels pretty good to be able to admit that it's not always fine. Sometimes, that's okay. TIFU by accidentally causing a scene at a wedding and nearly ruining my best friend's big day. So, here's the setup. My best friend, let's call her Lisa, was getting married to the love of her life, Mike. They've been together for years, and Lisa asked me to be her maid of honor, which was an honor, honestly. I've been best friends with her since we were in grade school, and I was over the moon that she chose me for such an important role in her life. I had a lot of responsibilities leading up to the wedding, which included organizing the bachelorette party and making sure everything was in order on the big day. Now, I should mention that I am notoriously bad at handling stress, especially when it comes to events like this. Anyway, the wedding day arrived, and I had been up since the crack of dawn, making sure all the little details were taken care of. The last thing I wanted was to mess up something for Lisa. The ceremony was at this beautiful old church, and the reception was at a fancy venue just down the road. Everything was going smoothly. The bridesmaids were all ready, the groomsmen were looking sharp, and Lisa was absolutely glowing as she walked down the aisle. But here's where things took a turn. You see, I have a tendency to get a little emotional at events like weddings. I'm not talking about teary-eyed or anything, I mean full-on, choke-up, ugly cry emotional. It's embarrassing, but it's also who I am. So, as Lisa walked down the aisle, I was already fighting back tears. The ceremony itself was beautiful, and I'm pretty sure I was sobbing silently by the time Lisa and Mike exchanged their vows. I wasn't the only one either. There were a lot of sniffles in the room, and some of the guests were openly crying, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to completely break down in front of everyone. But then, something happened. The wedding vows. It was time for Lisa and Mike to exchange rings, and that's when it went all wrong. I was holding on to Lisa's bouquet during the ceremony, and the moment she handed over the rings, I realized that I had, without a doubt, forgotten to grab the ring box. You know, the thing that holds the rings. Yeah, it wasn't in my hands. I looked down, and my stomach dropped. I had left it back in the dressing room with my purse and everything else I needed. I don't know how I missed it. It was literally the most important thing for the ceremony. The ceremony was running smoothly up until that point, and now, I was in full panic mode. I had no idea what to do. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and I wasn't about to admit my mistake in front of all those people. So I did the only thing that seemed remotely reasonable at the time. I leaned over to Lisa, who was still holding her hand out for the ring, and whispered, "I forgot the rings, in the dressing room." Now, if you think she was just going to stay calm and let this slide, well, you'd be wrong. Lisa froze, and her face went completely white. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell she was freaking out in her head. And then, in a panic, she whispered back, "What do we do?" By this point, Mike, the groom, started to look confused, like he wasn't sure if this was part of some elaborate joke or if something was actually wrong. The priest was looking at me too, waiting for me to do something. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. It was like time had slowed down. In a moment of pure instinct, I stood up abruptly, saying, "I'll be right back," in a way that sounded way too casual for the situation. Everyone in the church turned to look at me as I started to awkwardly shuffle down the aisle, my heels clicking on the wooden floor. But here's where things get real ugly. As I made my way out of the church, I completely missed the door to the side entrance, which led to the dressing room. Instead, I walked straight toward the front of the church, where the reception hall was just outside. That's when I realized I was heading in the wrong direction, but instead of turning around and going back, I just kept walking. The panic and stress completely clouded my judgment. By the time I reached the reception area, it was obvious to everyone that I had no idea what I was doing. The wedding planner was standing there, confused, watching me with wide eyes as I nearly knocked over a vase. At this point, I had fully realized that I was lost in the venue and had no clue where I had left the ring box. I rushed past the reception tables, knocking over a couple of chairs in the process, while the poor planner tried to keep up with me. The guests were all murmuring at this point, and I'm sure they thought I had completely lost my mind. I finally found the bridal suite, but when I walked in, I realized that in my state of panic, I hadn't actually grabbed the ring box from the table. It was still sitting back in the room where we'd all gotten ready earlier. I bolted back the way I came, but by this point, I was getting winded. I was also starting to wonder if this whole thing was a nightmare I was going to wake up from. When I finally made it back to the church, I was out of breath, a little sweaty, and very close to losing it emotionally. But when I returned to the ceremony, there was one last unexpected thing. As I walked back in, I tripped on the hem of my dress and fell right into the aisle. I crashed into the flower girl, sending her basket of petals flying into the air, and somehow knocked over one of the groomsmen in the process. The room fell silent for a second before a couple of people nervously laughed. At this point, I was absolutely mortified, but somehow, Lisa and Mike kept it together. Mike smiled and told me not to worry about it. Lisa was laughing, though it was the kind of laugh where you could tell she was trying to make the best of a disaster. I finally handed over the rings, after some very awkward moments, and the ceremony continued. Afterward, I had to sit through the reception with every single guest trying not to make eye contact with me. I'm not sure how I survived the rest of the evening, but somehow, I made it through. To this day, Lisa and Mike still talk about how I saved the wedding by making everyone laugh, though I'm pretty sure they only say that to spare my feelings. I'm never going to live that down. The moral of the story? Always double-check that you have the rings, and for the love of all things holy, stay calm during weddings. Anyway, at least we all survived the day, but I don't think I'll ever be invited to be a maid of honor again. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I'm not sure if this counts as a fuck up, but it definitely feels like one. This is a story of how I, a 27-year-old guy, managed to completely embarrass myself in front of my crush, my best friend, and a whole group of people at a bar, all because of one unassuming, poorly timed decision. So buckle up, it's a wild ride. A few months ago, I started seeing this amazing woman, Sarah. We met through mutual friends at a party, and instantly hit it off. She's smart, funny, and way out of my league. I'm still not sure how I convinced her to go out with me in the first place. We'd been on a few dates by this point, and things were looking promising. I was actually starting to think this could be something serious. Anyway, last weekend, Sarah invited me to join her at this local bar to hang out with some of her friends. I was excited. This was the first time I'd be meeting her friend group, so I really wanted to make a good impression. I figured, hey, I'm a pretty cool guy. How hard can it be? Famous last words, right? The night started off smoothly. Sarah was as charming and beautiful as ever, and I got along well with her friends. There was a good vibe in the air, and I felt like I was actually fitting in. Everyone was drinking, laughing, and talking about random things. I was doing well, no awkward moments, no stumbles in conversation. I was starting to relax, thinking, maybe I've got this whole social situation figured out. Then, about an hour into the evening, someone ordered a round of tequila shots. I'd had a couple beers already, and I was feeling pretty confident. Sarah had one, her best friend, Jenna, had one, and then it came to me. I looked around the table and realized no one was backing down from the shots. So, naturally, I didn't want to be the odd one out. But there was one problem: I hate tequila. I'm not talking about the kind of I'm not crazy about tequila but I'll drink it anyway hate. I mean real, deep-rooted, this stuff is going to ruin my life hate. I've had some bad experiences with tequila in the past, and every time I smell it, I feel like my stomach might turn itself inside out. But there it was, sitting in front of me, calling my name. I knew if I refused, it would be a social disaster. I also knew that if I made a scene or tried to explain my hatred of tequila, I'd be seen as a total buzzkill. So I did what any semi-rational person would do in this situation. I told myself to suck it up and take the shot. Big mistake. I grabbed the shot glass, and before I could rethink my decision, I downed it. Immediately, my throat caught fire. It was like someone had set off a Molotov cocktail inside me. The taste was absolutely horrible, but the real disaster was coming. My body wasn't having it. Not even a little. Without warning, the tequila seemed to activate every part of my digestive system that had been sleeping peacefully. I could feel the burning liquid sloshing around inside me, and my stomach was making violent protests. I wasn't sure what to do. My body was about to betray me in front of everyone, and I had no idea how to stop it. Sarah turned to me with a big smile, clearly expecting me to laugh it off, like everyone else had. But in that moment, I was no longer in control of my faculties. My body had gone into autopilot, and my brain was too far behind to stop the train wreck. I felt the familiar sensation of nausea hit me in waves, and there was nothing I could do to fight it. I stood up quickly, almost knocking my chair over, and made a beeline for the bathroom. The problem? The bathroom was on the other side of the bar, and I was surrounded by people. By the time I reached the door, I was barely holding it together. I managed to get inside the bathroom, but before I could even reach the toilet, the tequila won. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say that I didn't make it. The entire bathroom ended up looking like a crime scene. It wasn't just a little vomit either. It was the full everything I've ever eaten in my life kind of purge. I stood there in shock, my brain still trying to catch up with what had just happened. But there was no time to think. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. I picked it up, and it was Sarah, asking if I was okay. Apparently, I'd been gone for too long, and they were starting to worry. I quickly texted her back, trying to downplay the situation, saying I just needed a minute and that I'd be right out. But inside, I knew I was a mess. I felt humiliated and could already picture how this was going to play out. I wasn't sure how to face anyone after that. But there was no choice. I had to go back out. I splashed my face with water, did the best I could to compose myself, and stepped out of the bathroom. As I walked back to the table, I tried to act normal, but the damage was done. Sarah's friends had all seen the look on my face when I left, and they knew something was wrong. As I sat back down, I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for an explanation. I tried to play it cool, but it wasn't working. Someone mentioned something about how I seemed off, and before I could come up with a plausible excuse, I just blurted it out. I got sick, I couldn't handle the tequila. It was as if my brain just gave up and decided to let the truth spill out. The table went silent for a second, and then Sarah's best friend Jenna started laughing. Sarah, clearly trying to save face for both of us, quickly joined in. Then the whole group started laughing. It wasn't mean-spirited, but I could feel the awkwardness radiating from me like a heat source. I was the guy who couldn't handle his tequila, the guy who went into the bathroom to puke his guts out in front of his girlfriend's friends. The rest of the night was a blur of awkward glances and nervous laughter. The worst part? I found out the next day that Sarah's friend group had already started making jokes about my tequila incident. Sarah told me they were calling me Tequila Boy now. It was a joke, but honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ever going to live this one down. The moral of the story? Don't drink tequila if you can't handle it. And definitely don't try to be the cool guy who pretends he can. It's not worth it. TIFU by thinking I could handle a simple home renovation project myself. I've always been the kind of person who's proud of figuring things out on my own. Whether it's fixing a leaky faucet, assembling IKEA furniture without the instructions, well, sort of, or tweaking a broken laptop, I've convinced myself that I'm handy enough to take on just about anything. So when I bought my first house a few years ago, I thought I could tackle a small home renovation project, updating the bathroom. The bathroom was nothing fancy, just a typical suburban mid-century bathroom with outdated tiles, old fixtures, and a few stains that made the place feel like a set from a 90s sitcom. But the bones were solid, and I figured that with a weekend's worth of work, I could modernize the space with a fresh coat of paint, new tile, and updated fixtures. I had all the tools ready, watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and I was feeling pretty confident that I could nail this DIY project. First mistake, I didn't realize how much work was actually involved in tiling a bathroom floor. I started by ripping out the old tiles. Easy enough. The old tiles were glued on, so I got a crowbar and started prying them off. I was so into the project that I didn't even bother wearing gloves. Hey, I was tough, right? Well, turns out, a crowbar and a full-on demolition aren't as glamorous as they seem in the videos. After about an hour of scrapping away, I had managed to rip up all the tiles, leaving the concrete slab underneath. At this point, I realized I probably should have worn gloves, because my hands were covered in scrapes and my back felt like I'd been lifting weights all day. But I pushed through, hoping I could get it done by nightfall. The next day, I started on the actual tiling. I followed the tutorial to the letter, mixing the thin-set mortar, spreading it on the floor, and laying down the tiles one by one. But here's the thing, tiles, for some reason, didn't feel as easy as the videos made it seem. I made a few mistakes, one of the tiles didn't sit right, another one cracked when I tried to cut it, and one tile got stuck on a spot where it wasn't supposed to go. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, covered in mortar, and had somehow managed to lay out a pattern that didn't look anything like the one in the video. But I told myself I could fix it. It was fine. The next morning, I started grouting the tiles, which was, of course, the next step. At this point, I was feeling like I was in the home stretch. Sure, the pattern was off, but it wasn't horrible. I started spreading the grout over the tiles, and that's when things really started to spiral. First, I forgot to wipe the grout off the tiles after applying it. I had read about the need to clean it up as you go, but in my prideful rush to finish, I thought, oh, I'll get it later. So, I left it all there, thinking I'd clean it all up at the end. Then, the grout dried, and I realized I had sealed the tiles with grout everywhere. Scrubbing it off became an absurd challenge. No amount of elbow grease could get it off, and I ended up using a wire brush to scrub the grout, which only scratched up the surface of the tiles. At this point, I was considering if I should just give up and call a professional, but my stubbornness kept me going. Now, it was time for the caulking. I'd watched the video tutorials, and they made it look so easy. Just run a bead of caulk along the edges, smooth it out with your finger, and boom, you're done. The reality, however, was far different. Caulk is super messy, and I had no idea what I was doing. The caulk went everywhere except where I intended it to go. It ended up in the wrong spots, on the tiles, on my hands, and even on my face. By the end of it, I looked like I had been in a fight with a tube of toothpaste. I took a step back and surveyed my work. It was nothing like I had envisioned. The tiles were uneven, the grout was a mess, and the caulk was, well, it was everywhere. But I couldn't stop now. I had spent hours on this bathroom and was determined to finish. So, I gritted my teeth and moved on to the next step, reinstalling the toilet. I had taken the toilet off earlier to do some work around the floor, and now it was time to put it back on. I lifted it, trying to line it up with the wax ring on the floor, and that's when I learned something that no one had warned me about. Toilets are heavy, especially when you're trying to set them back down in a confined space. I finally got the toilet back on the ring, but I didn't quite get it centered. So, I had to move it again, which meant lifting a 100-pound toilet a second time. By the third try, I was cursing at the thing and started considering just leaving the toilet in the hallway. Once it was finally set down, I tightened the bolts and turned the water back on. Everything seemed fine at first, until it wasn't. I flushed the toilet, and water started leaking from the base. I thought I had sealed everything properly, but apparently not. The leak spread across the floor, and suddenly, I was in full-blown panic mode. My bathroom was flooded with water, my tiles were still a disaster, and I was starting to question whether I had any business doing this at all. After a lot of frenzied Googling, I realized I had forgotten to properly tighten the wax ring on the toilet. I had to call a plumber who, thankfully, was able to fix the leak and reinstall the toilet the right way. He took one look at my bathroom and said, "You know, this isn't that bad for a DIY job, but it's clear you probably should have called someone sooner." I stood there, absolutely defeated. I had learned the hard way that some things are better left to professionals. The project that I thought would take a weekend ended up being a month-long saga that cost me far more than I had initially planned. Between buying new tools, replacing cracked tiles, and paying for the plumber's visit, the simple bathroom renovation cost me 3 times what I would have spent if I'd just hired someone in the first place. In the end, my bathroom is functional, but it's not the sleek, modern oasis I had dreamed of. It's more of a quirky, half-done, DIY disaster. My pride was shattered, and I swore I'd never take on another renovation project again. But the lesson here is simple: sometimes it's okay to admit that you're not a professional. And, more importantly, there's no shame in calling someone who actually knows what they're doing. Next time, I'll just hire someone. TIFU by accidentally sending my crush a very embarrassing text about her, and now she's ghosting me. So, I need to start by giving some context. There's this girl, let's call her Emily, and we've been working together for a few months now. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was just a friendly coworker, someone I'd exchange casual pleasantries with during the day. But over time, I started noticing things, like how her smile would light up the room or how she'd laugh at even my dumbest jokes. Slowly, I began to develop feelings for her. Naturally, I tried to keep these feelings in check. I mean, we work together, so mixing work and personal life can get messy, right? But I wasn't blind to the way she seemed to enjoy spending time with me. There were moments when our conversations would run longer than necessary, or we'd make plans for lunch even when it wasn't a lunch break. Still, I kept my feelings to myself. I wasn't the type to rush things or be too forward, so I decided I'd play it cool and just let things develop naturally. Now, here's where things get tricky. A few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my best friend, Sam, about Emily. I was venting about how much I liked her but was too nervous to actually make a move. Sam, being the slightly reckless, but well-meaning friend that he is, urged me to take the plunge and send Emily a text, just to let her know how I felt. "What's the worst that could happen?" he asked. "You get rejected?" Pfft. You can handle that. Just do it. I didn't listen to my gut. Instead, I followed Sam's advice. But instead of just sending her a simple, "Hey, I really like you," I decided to go all in. I crafted this long, overly poetic message about how she made my heart race, how I'd been thinking about her constantly, and how I wanted to see where things could go. It was sincere, sure, but in hindsight, it came off as a bit much. Not exactly the casual, cool vibe I was hoping for. So, the moment came. I had written the message, reread it for like the 1,000th time, and took a deep breath before hitting send. And then, nothing happened. I waited. And waited. No response. I started to spiral, replaying the whole thing in my head. Was it too much? Was I too forward? Was I being cringy? Maybe I scared her off. Maybe she was just trying to figure out how to let me down gently. I couldn't stop overthinking every possible outcome. The longer the silence stretched, the worse I felt. Then, the worst possible thing happened. I was getting ready for bed when I accidentally opened my group chat with Sam. I meant to just glance at something he had sent earlier, but in my sleep-deprived state, I clicked on the wrong message. And there it was, my own message to Emily, but not in the way I had hoped. See, what had actually happened was that I was so nervous about sending the message to Emily in the first place that I had accidentally sent it to the group chat. To make things worse, the message wasn't just a random "Hey, I like you," but the whole heartfelt, embarrassing rant about my feelings for her. In my panic, I frantically tried to delete the message, but it was too late. Sam and our other friend Mike had already seen it. Mike, being the absolute savage that he is, immediately texted me, "Dude, you really went full rom-com on that one, huh?" I was mortified. I texted back frantically, telling them that I didn't mean to send it, that it was for Emily, and that I was just trying to figure things out. But of course, they didn't take me seriously. They started making jokes, calling me Romeo and Captain Emo, and basically roasting me for the entire night. Sam even sent me a screenshot of the message and told me that I should just roll with it and tell Emily that I had nothing to lose now. Yeah, easy for him to say. The next morning, I woke up to the notification that Emily had responded to my original message. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it, and this is what it said: "Hey, I saw that message you sent me last night. I wasn't sure if you were serious or if that was just, like, a joke or something. I'm not really sure how to take it. Sorry, I'm kind of confused." I stared at that text for a long time. How could I have made this worse? I had already gone full-on emotional with her, and now she was confused? I felt like I had totally blown it. The worst part? I hadn't even considered the possibility that I might have sent the message at a time when she was already hanging out with friends or something. If she'd been laughing at it with her own friends, I was finished. So, I spent the entire day agonizing over what to say back. Should I apologize? Should I play it cool? Should I just say I was drunk, even though I wasn't? Eventually, I decided to go with a classic move, humor. I responded with something along the lines of, "Haha, yeah, I can see how that could be a lot to take in. I'm really sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I think I just got a little carried away because I like you a lot. I promise I wasn't trying to be weird or pushy." I hit send and immediately regretted it. Was it too apologetic? Was I just digging myself into a deeper hole? The next few days were absolute torture. Emily didn't respond to my message for a while. I tried to act normal at work, but it was impossible. Every time I saw her, I felt like she was avoiding eye contact or being a little distant. She didn't stop being polite, but there was no sign of the friendly rapport we had before. It was like the atmosphere had completely changed. Then, the worst possible thing happened again. I noticed that Emily wasn't replying to my messages at all. She had gone silent. And I don't mean just the texting silence, she was being distant at work too. She wasn't replying to my attempts at small talk. She wasn't asking if I wanted to grab lunch like we used to. It was clear she was actively avoiding me. I went into full panic mode. Did I ruin everything? Was she ghosting me? Was it over before it even began? At this point, I just felt like crawling into a hole and staying there forever. A week passed. No messages. No responses. Just awkward silences and brief exchanges at work that were more professional than personal. I had come to terms with the fact that I'd completely messed up. I probably wouldn't be hearing from her again, and if I did, it would probably be some sort of "hey, we should just keep things professional" text. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I got a message from her. It simply said, "Hey, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. I appreciate your honesty, but I'm not really sure I feel the same way. I think we should just keep things the way they are." It wasn't the rejection I was expecting. I mean, it wasn't a yes either, but it was a soft rejection. At least she was being kind about it. I still don't know what to make of it. I guess the good news is she didn't completely shut me out, but the bad news is that I definitely won't be texting her like that again anytime soon. TLDR, sent an embarrassing, overly emotional text to my crush, accidentally shared it with my friends, and now she's ghosting me at work. TIFU, by trying to impress my date with my cooking skills and almost burning down the building. So, I, 29M, have been dating this girl, Anna, 27F, for a few months now. Everything was going great, plenty of chemistry, shared interests, lots of laughs. We'd been on a handful of dates, and things were progressing well. She's always been super supportive and encouraging, and honestly, I've never had a girl make me feel this comfortable before. But like a lot of people, I had that one thing I really wanted to impress her with: cooking. It's something I've always enjoyed doing, and I thought, hey, if I cook her a nice dinner, she'll be impressed by my skills. It'll be a perfect evening. I've never really cooked anything too complex, but I know my way around the kitchen enough to throw together something decent. Nothing too fancy, but a nice homemade meal. The plan was simple: a nice pasta dish, garlic bread, and a fresh salad. Easy enough, right? I had everything set up. I even bought a bottle of wine to go with it, because I'm classy like that. Anna had mentioned a few times that she really liked Italian food, so I figured this was a no-brainer. I texted her earlier that day and told her I had something special planned for dinner. She was excited, and I could feel the anticipation building. That was the first sign I should have paid attention to, but I was too busy dreaming of impressing her to realize what I was getting myself into. I got home from work, went straight to the kitchen, and started getting everything ready. I started with the garlic bread. I know, garlic bread is basically idiot-proof, but I wanted to make it extra crispy and flavorful, so I took a little more time with it than usual. The recipe said to bake it at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes, but I figured I could just bump it up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit to make it crispier, and it would only take 10 minutes. I know. Rookie mistake. I should have followed the instructions to the letter, but I was feeling confident. Next, I started working on the pasta. I boiled the water, tossed in some salt, and waited for it to come to a boil. While I was doing that, I prepped the sauce, which was supposed to be a simple tomato basil sauce with some extra seasoning. I got the pan nice and hot, threw in some olive oil, garlic, and onions, and was happily stirring away. Everything was going according to plan. But then, disaster struck. I got distracted by a message from Anna. She was running a little late and wouldn't be there for another 30 minutes. This should have been a sign to me to slow down, but instead, I took it as an opportunity to rush and finish everything before she arrived. I started frantically chopping up basil, stirring the sauce, and keeping an eye on the garlic bread, which was starting to smell really good. It was right at the 10-minute mark, and I figured I'd take it out early. Big mistake. I opened the oven door, and immediately the strong smell of burnt garlic hit my nose. My heart sank. I looked at the garlic bread, and it was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly golden brown anymore. It was more like charcoal brown. I panicked. I grabbed the pan, and as I was taking it out, I accidentally knocked over the bottle of olive oil I had on the counter. The bottle tipped over, and some of the oil spilled onto the stove. I tried to wipe it up quickly, but in my haste, I just made it worse. I turned back to the pasta, which was now beginning to foam over the pot because I forgot to lower the heat. It was a disaster. I didn't have time to clean everything up because I heard Anna's car pull up outside. I quickly ran around the kitchen trying to salvage what I could. I dumped the overcooked garlic bread into the trash, wiped down the stove, and threw the pasta into a strainer. The sauce was finally coming together, and I was ready to plate everything, but then I noticed that the pasta wasn't the only thing burning. I looked down at the bottom of the pot and saw smoke rising from the pot of pasta water, which was still boiling and evaporating away. At this point, I was in full-on panic mode. I had a burnt garlic bread disaster, overcooked pasta, and now I was worried about the smoke. I quickly grabbed the pot of boiling water, ran to the sink, and dumped it out. And that's when I realized the smoke wasn't just from the water evaporating, it was coming from the toaster oven. The one I had used to cook the garlic bread. I glanced over, and to my horror, I saw that the toaster oven was smoking. Actually, it was more like billowing smoke, as if it had caught on fire. I froze. Now, I don't know what to do. I couldn't just leave it there. So, I rushed to the toaster oven, opened the door, and I was greeted with an inferno of burnt garlic and bread crumbs. The flames were small, but they were there. I could smell the plastic melting. I panicked even more and grabbed the nearest towel to try to put it out, but I ended up knocking the toaster oven off the counter instead, and it fell to the floor. This caused the oven to tilt open even more, spilling the flames onto the floor. I was standing there, completely lost in what to do, when the front door opened. Anna walked in and, for a split second, her face was just pure confusion. She looked at me, looked at the kitchen chaos, and then looked at me again. There was me, standing in front of her, red-faced and completely overwhelmed, smoke rising from the kitchen, and the smell of burnt garlic bread permeating the entire place. What's going on here?" she asked, looking around. I didn't know how to respond. I was so embarrassed. I had wanted to impress her, but instead, I looked like I had set off a 5-alarm fire. I was trying to cook us dinner, I said, defeated. She looked at me, then the mess, and then at the kitchen. She started laughing. It wasn't a mocking laugh, it was more of a "this is ridiculous" laugh. And then, she said, "Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one who can't cook." To be honest, I was relieved. We ended up ordering takeout, and we spent the evening laughing about the disaster I'd created. It wasn't the romantic dinner I had envisioned, but we had a good time. After that, I made her promise that she'd never let me cook on our dates again. In the end, she appreciated the effort, but I'll be sticking to making reservations from now on. At least the food won't catch on fire. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic weekend getaway, and ending up almost getting arrested. It all started a couple of weeks ago when I decided I wanted to do something special for my girlfriend, Emily. We've been together for about 3 years now, and I figured it was time to step up my game. I'd been hearing all this talk about how important surprises are in relationships, and I figured, why not give it a shot? I wanted to plan a weekend getaway for the two of us, something romantic, but not too fancy, just enough to show her that I care and am willing to put in some effort. The problem was, I have a terrible track record when it comes to surprises. I've forgotten important dates, failed miserably at planning trips, and, in general, have always been the guy who insists on winging it rather than making an actual plan. So, I decided that this time, I was going to do things right. I was going to pick a place, book everything in advance, and keep it a secret so that Emily would be genuinely surprised when I told her where we were going. I spent a whole week scouring the internet for the perfect destination. After much deliberation, I settled on a cozy little cabin in the woods, about 2 hours away from the city. It looked picturesque in the photos, nestled by a serene lake, surrounded by tall pine trees, and with a fireplace that would set the mood perfectly. It was just the kind of place I thought Emily would love, and it felt like a perfect blend of romantic seclusion and outdoor adventure. Now, there was a catch. The cabin was located in a pretty remote area, and the last part of the drive was down a narrow, winding road with little to no signage. I'd read the reviews, and they all warned that it could be a bit tricky to find, especially at night. I didn't want to risk getting lost, so I made sure to mark the location on my phone and memorize the directions. As the days leading up to the trip passed, I felt more and more excited to pull off this surprise. I decided that the best way to keep the surprise under wraps would be to tell Emily that we were just going on a simple weekend road trip. I kept it vague and said we'd be visiting a couple of cool spots in the area, but I didn't tell her the destination. I even packed her bag for her. I know, that was definitely overstepping, but I was determined to make it all seamless, and she was excited, especially when I mentioned that we'd be getting away from the city for a couple of days. The day of the trip arrived, and everything was going perfectly. We got into the car, played some music, and talked about all sorts of random things. The drive was smooth for the most part, and I was feeling pretty smug about how well I was pulling off this whole surprise thing. Emily had no idea where we were going, and I could tell she was curious but also excited. As we neared the final stretch of the drive, things started to take a turn. We were deep in the woods now, and the road had become narrower and bumpier. Emily didn't seem too concerned at first, but I could feel the tension building. The GPS on my phone was getting more and more confused as we veered off the main road, and the signs had become almost non-existent. Still, I had faith in my abilities and figured we were only about 10 minutes away. But then, disaster struck. The road started to look less and less like a road and more like a trail. There were huge rocks in the middle of the path, and the trees were so close to the car that it felt like we might scratch the sides if we weren't careful. Emily asked, "Are you sure this is the right way?" And I confidently replied, "Of course. It's just a bit rough, but we're almost there." I think she bought it, though I could tell she was starting to get a little uneasy. At this point, my phone's GPS had completely stopped working. I was now flying blind. The cabin was supposed to be just off this trail, but there were no signs, no indicators, and absolutely no cell service. I was starting to sweat. After a few more minutes of driving, the trail became impossible to navigate without completely destroying the car. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping to get out and assess the situation. Emily was now looking at me with a mix of confusion and concern, but I assured her that it was part of the adventure. That's when things went from bad to worse. As I stepped out of the car to try and figure out where we went wrong, I heard a loud rustling in the bushes nearby. I froze. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that this could either be a curious animal or something far worse, and the last thing I needed was to be confronted by a bear or a mountain lion. I tried to act casual, but I could feel my heart racing as I peered into the darkness. And then, out of nowhere, 2 bright flashlights suddenly illuminated the scene. A voice shouted, "Hey! What the hell are you doing on private property?" I turned to see 2 men standing by the edge of the trail, both holding flashlights and looking pretty upset. Before I could even say anything, one of them approached, clearly pissed off. "This is a restricted area," he said. "You're trespassing. Do you have any idea where you are?" I stammered, "I'm, sorry, I thought this was a cabin rental. I was just following the directions." The second man, who was holding a radio, looked at the first guy and muttered something under his breath. The first guy didn't look convinced. No, this area is off limits. You've wandered onto a private hunting ground. You're lucky we don't call the sheriff. At this point, Emily was sitting in the car, wide-eyed and terrified. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I realized the magnitude of my mistake. I'd taken us to the wrong place entirely. Not only was it not a cabin rental, but I'd managed to drive us onto a restricted private property where hunters probably camped during the off-season. After what felt like an eternity of awkward apologies and pleading, the men seemed to soften up a bit. They eventually agreed to let us go with a warning, but not before giving me a lecture about trespassing and the importance of knowing where you're going before heading into the woods. As we drove away from the area, I felt like an absolute idiot. Emily was trying to hold in her laughter, but every time I glanced at her, she would burst out into giggles. To make matters worse, I was still a little shaken up by the experience, and the whole romantic weekend getaway had clearly gone off the rails. We ended up finding a hotel nearby and making the best of the situation. The surprise weekend turned into a different kind of adventure, one where we laughed, talked, and definitely learned a lot about my navigation skills, or lack thereof. Emily still jokes about it to this day, and whenever I suggest going away for the weekend, she raises an eyebrow and says, "Are you sure this time?" I guess I'll have to stick to more straightforward plans from now on. But hey, at least it made for a memorable story, right? TIFU by accidentally sending an embarrassing text to my boss that led to a series of disastrous events. It all started last Tuesday when I was having a particularly frustrating day at work. I'm in my late 20s, a recent hire at a mid-sized marketing company, and though I love the job, the pressure can be overwhelming at times. On top of that, my boss, Jessica, is a bit of a perfectionist, and while she's not mean, she can be intense and always expects the highest standards from the team. If she isn't on top of you every minute, it feels like she's watching your every move from a distance. The day was particularly stressful because we had just finished up a huge client presentation that had been weeks in the making. I had spent the last 3 days finalizing the slides, tweaking the language, and preparing responses for potential client questions. I was exhausted, and honestly, I felt like my brain was fried. Around 3 p.m., I received a text from my friend Mark. We've known each other since high school, and while he's currently working in a completely different field, we keep in touch regularly. Mark and I have a running joke about how stressful our jobs are, and we often send each other memes or sarcastic texts to vent. That day, he sent me a meme about corporate hell, a picture of a guy chained to a desk with the caption, "Welcome to your soul-sucking 9 to 5. I burst out laughing at my desk and immediately texted him back. At that moment, I was so relieved the presentation was finally over that I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. So, in the spirit of relieving stress, I tapped out a quick reply to Mark, saying, "Ugh, this job is literally killing me. It's like being trapped in a cage where every mistake costs you your soul. Jessica is on my case like a hawk. I can't even breathe without her noticing. I just want to scream and throw my laptop out the window. So over it." Feeling a little lighter after that venting session, I hit send and returned to my work. I was busy putting the finishing touches on an email to the client when my phone buzzed. It was a reply from Mark, but something was off. It wasn't the usual joke or sarcastic remark. Instead, I saw a notification that said, "Jessica McDonald has liked your message." Confused, I quickly checked my phone and realized that I had sent the text to Jessica, my boss, and not Mark. My heart dropped into my stomach. I had accidentally texted her what was essentially a rant about how much I hated the job and how I couldn't stand her micromanaging. I froze, staring at my phone in disbelief. At first, I thought maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe I had clicked on the wrong thread or something, but when I opened the conversation, I saw the whole message in its full glory. This job is literally killing me. It's like being trapped in a cage where every mistake costs you your soul. Jessica is on my case like a hawk. I can't even breathe without her noticing. I just want to scream and throw my laptop out the window. So over it. I was mortified. My hands started shaking, and I immediately tried to recall the message, but it was too late. I had sent it over 30 minutes ago, and there was no way to undo it. I could only stare at the screen in horror. I didn't know what to do. I considered pretending it was some sort of accidental text, like maybe I had meant to send it to Mark and then mistakenly typed Jessica's name. But no, that would be a terrible lie and would probably make things even worse. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had only one option: I needed to apologize. I spent the next 5 minutes drafting a text that was as apologetic as possible without completely groveling. I wrote, "Jessica, I am so incredibly sorry. I made a huge mistake and accidentally sent that message to you instead of my friend Mark. Please know that I respect you and the work you do. I'm just overwhelmed with the pressure of the project, and I didn't mean any of what I said. I understand if you're upset, and I'm happy to discuss this further if you'd like. Again, I am truly sorry." I took a deep breath, pressed send, and then sat back, waiting for the inevitable fallout. To my surprise, Jessica replied almost immediately. Her message was short and neutral, which only made my anxiety spike. "No problem. I understand. Let's talk tomorrow." Talk tomorrow? What does that even mean? Was she giving me a warning? Was she going to fire me? I was in full panic mode at this point. My mind started running through every possible worst-case scenario. Maybe I'd have to work on a performance improvement plan. Maybe I'd be publicly shamed in front of the entire team. Or worse, maybe she'd go straight to HR, and I'd get a formal reprimand. The next day, I walked into work like I was heading to my execution. I tried to act normal, but every time I saw Jessica, my heart would race, and I'd have to force myself to keep my cool. Around lunchtime, she finally called me into her office. My mind was racing. As I entered her office, she gestured for me to sit down. I sat down, barely able to make eye contact. "I wanted to talk to you about your message yesterday," Jessica said. "I've been thinking about it a lot. First off, I'm not upset, but I do want to address it. I can tell you're stressed, and I understand that sometimes work can feel overwhelming. But I need to let you know that the way you're feeling, while valid, shouldn't be conveyed that way. We're a team here, and if you need help or support, we're here to give it. That's something you need to communicate, not internalize." I nodded, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. She didn't seem angry at all, just calm and professional. It wasn't what I had expected. She continued, "We're not perfect, and I know I can be hard on you guys. But I want you to know that we value your work. If you ever feel overwhelmed, please don't hesitate to come to me directly. And just so you know, I've been there. I get it." That was it. No reprimand, no lecture. Just a brief, honest conversation about managing stress and communicating more effectively. I was both relieved and embarrassed. It turned out that my worst fear was unfounded. In the end, everything worked out. Jessica didn't fire me. She didn't even give me a stern talking to. But every time I look at my phone now, I have this irrational fear of sending a text to the wrong person. At least I've learned to double-check before hitting send, and to be a little more careful about venting to my friends. TLDR, I accidentally texted my boss a rant about how much I hated my job, including some harsh comments about her micromanaging. I panicked and apologized, and to my surprise, she was understanding and gave me a calm talk about communication and stress management. TIFU by inviting my ex to my wedding, thinking she'd just be a guest from the past, and now my marriage is hanging by a thread. Let me set the stage. I'm a 29-year-old guy, recently married to the love of my life, Emma. We've been together for 4 years and things are going great. The proposal was perfect, the wedding was beautiful, and everything was coming together. I felt on top of the world. But there's a piece of this puzzle that I didn't think through properly. My ex, Lily, and I were together for about 2.5 years before we broke up. We were young and, honestly, pretty toxic together. It was one of those relationships that, in hindsight, was just bad for both of us. She was always manipulative, I was always insecure, and we fed off each other's worst traits. We broke up over 3 years ago, and I didn't think much about it. I'd moved on, found Emma, and everything was amazing. Then came the wedding. It's been a whirlwind, as these things are. I was trying to keep the guest list small, but it seemed like every time I blinked, someone else was added. A family member from Emma's side. A childhood friend of mine. The guy who used to sit next to me in high school chemistry. I knew I had to be fair to everyone, so I thought, hey, I'll invite Lily. We're fine now, right? We can be civil. We hadn't talked in a while, but I thought it'd be a nice gesture. I figured she could come, enjoy the celebration, and I wouldn't feel like I was leaving her out of some important part of my life. So I messaged her. It was something like, hey, it's been a while. I'm getting married in a couple of months. If you want to come, it'd be good to see you again and catch up. Her response was almost immediate. I'd love to. I'll be there. At that point, I felt good about my decision. The past was the past, and I thought I could invite my ex without it being a big deal. I didn't think twice about it. I mean, I was in a happy relationship. I was marrying the woman of my dreams. I didn't expect anything to go wrong. Fast forward to the wedding day. We were running a bit behind, as weddings tend to do. My bride, Emma, looked absolutely stunning. My family was there, her family was there, and everything was falling into place. The ceremony was beautiful, the vows were emotional, and then came the reception. The moment I was dreading arrived. Lily showed up. She looked amazing, of course. Even though we hadn't talked in over a year, she managed to look effortlessly gorgeous. She walked in with this vibe of being that girl who had clearly moved on and was thriving. It didn't help that she knew a few people at the wedding, so she wasn't just some stranger in the crowd. She was part of the scene. I noticed her almost immediately. Emma, bless her heart, was too busy greeting everyone and soaking in the love to notice that Lily had arrived. I decided to go over and say hi to Lily, just to break the ice. Hey, it's good to see you. I said, feeling like I was being the bigger person. Yeah, it's been a while, she responded, smiling too widely. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but at that moment, I realized I hadn't actually spoken to Lily about boundaries or expectations. She was still talking to me like we were old friends, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. But we talked for a bit, laughed about old memories, and then I excused myself to go back to Emma. That's when things started to get weird. During the reception, I noticed that Lily kept eyeing Emma. She wasn't being subtle about it either. She was leaning over to people at the table she was sitting at, making little comments, and her eyes never seemed to leave Emma when she wasn't talking to someone else. Every time I looked over, it was like she was calculating something, analyzing the scene. It made me uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off, but then came the speeches. My best man, Jake, stood up to give his speech. He's a funny guy, great sense of humor, and he'd known me for years. Part of his speech was about how I'd been kind of a mess after Lily and I broke up. He even joked about how much of an emotional wreck I was during that time. Everyone laughed. It was all lighthearted, but there was a small part of me that wished Jake would have skipped that particular story. Lily, of course, was the only one who didn't laugh. She just stared at me, and I could see a flash of something in her eyes. I couldn't quite place it, but it made me uneasy. After the speech, things started to spiral. I was mingling with people when Emma came up to me, looking a little pale. She pulled me aside and whispered, "What the hell is Lily doing here?" I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's acting weird. She's staring at me, whispering to your cousins, and then she asked me about your relationship. She's trying to start shit." I was floored. I hadn't seen any of that, and I honestly thought Emma was just being paranoid. But when I looked over, I saw Lily in the corner, talking to my cousin and, was that my old college roommate? She was playing the role of someone who belonged there, like she was still part of my world. At that moment, I realized how badly I'd screwed up. By now, the reception was in full swing. People were drinking, dancing, and enjoying the night, but I couldn't get Lily out of my head. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. I knew Emma wasn't happy, and I could tell by the way she kept looking at Lily that she was feeling increasingly uncomfortable. I approached Lily again, more out of obligation than anything else. "Hey, I think it's time for you to head out," I said, trying to sound casual but firm. She raised an eyebrow. "What? Come on, we're just catching up. What's the issue?" I could tell that Lily didn't give a damn about what Emma felt, and that's when I realized that I had just let a toxic person into my most important day without thinking about the consequences. I told Lily she had to leave. She didn't argue much, but the tension was palpable. When I turned around, I saw Emma looking at me, her face red with anger. That night, Emma and I fought hard. She was furious. She told me that she never wanted Lily anywhere near our lives again, and she was hurt that I didn't even talk to her about inviting her in the first place. I told her that I thought I could handle it, but she wasn't having it. To make things worse, the next day, I got a text from Lily. She sent me a long message about how I had ruined everything by kicking her out of the wedding and how she thought we'd moved past things. Now, Emma and I are struggling. She says she feels betrayed and that I let someone who had a bad history with me get in the way of our special day. I don't know how to fix it. I tried to explain that it wasn't meant to be anything more than a gesture of goodwill, but the damage is done. I might have made the biggest mistake of my life. TIFU. So, this happened a few days ago, and I still can't believe it. I had been planning my friend's birthday surprise for weeks. I thought I was going to be the hero of the day, the one everyone talked about for ages. Instead, I became the guy everyone would forever remember as the one who ruined everything. Let me walk you through it. First, a bit of context. My best friend, we'll call her Sarah, has always had this obsession with themed parties. Like, if you give her a birthday, Christmas, or any celebration, she will turn it into a whole event. I admire her creativity, but I've also had to be a part of a few awkward half-dressed like pirates while doing yoga in the park events. This time, for her 30th birthday, she wanted a Gatsby-themed party, complete with a speakeasy-style entrance and all the jazz. It was going to be fancy, but with a modern twist. I thought I could help make it extra special. Now, Sarah's big thing is her love of jazz music. She's a huge fan of the old-school kind, especially Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald, and she has always talked about how incredible it would be to hear some of those classics played live at her birthday. So, I thought to myself, what if I hire a jazz band to make this even more unforgettable? I know what you're thinking. That's such a nice gesture, you're a great friend. Well, keep that thought for a second because it's about to go downhill fast. I started looking into local jazz bands and found one that seemed perfect. They were known for their performances at upscale events, and their reviews were glowing. The catch? They were expensive. But this was my best friend's birthday. I figured I'd splurge a bit and get something really special for her. I went ahead and booked them. But here's where I should have known something was off. The band only agreed to perform if they could arrive 2 hours before the event, because they needed to set the mood and rehearse a bit. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I assumed that was just part of the whole deal, get everything right, make sure the vibe was perfect. Fine by me. The day of the party finally arrived. I had coordinated with a couple of other friends to help with decorations, food, and drinks. Everything was going according to plan, and I was feeling proud of myself. The venue was decorated beautifully with Art Deco touches, vintage furniture, and golden accents. Sarah had no idea what was coming. I even managed to sneak in a gorgeous cake from her favorite bakery. The band arrived on time, and I greeted them with the usual pleasantries. They were an older group, maybe in their 50s or 60s, and all of them were dressed to the nines in tuxedos. Their setup was impressive: a saxophone, a double bass, a trumpet, and a piano. They seemed professional, and I was confident I had made the right choice. Here's where I should have asked more questions. They started setting up, but there was something off. They didn't seem to interact much with anyone else. They were focused on their instruments, barely speaking, and there was a kind of tension in the air. I assumed it was just pre-performance nerves, so I brushed it off. But then, 30 minutes before the party was supposed to start, I went over to check in with them. The bandleader, let's call him Dave, was standing next to the piano, looking a bit frazzled. He told me, "We'll need an extra half hour to warm up properly." I said, "Sure, no problem, take your time. The party will officially begin in 30 minutes. As the clock ticked down, I could feel the nervous energy in the air. Guests were starting to trickle in, and they were eagerly awaiting the special surprise of the night: live jazz music. Everyone was excited, including Sarah, who was on the verge of tears from all the anticipation. But then, disaster struck. Dave approached me and said something that almost made me faint. "We're ready to go, but we need to address something important first. We can't perform unless we have the right acoustics in the room." I blinked at him. "What do you mean, the right acoustics?" He explained that the room wasn't ideal for their performance, and they could only play a certain set of songs that would work in this space. He then casually mentioned that they wouldn't be able to do any of the songs I'd requested beforehand. I was dumbfounded, but I didn't have time to process because Sarah was just about to walk in. So, I gave the signal to let everyone in. People started trickling into the room, and the lights dimmed. The band began to play their first song. And this is when things took an unexpected turn. The music they played? It sounded nothing like jazz. It was this weird mix of strange experimental soundscapes, slow, discordant notes that made everyone uncomfortable. It was like they were playing the soundtrack to a nightmare. The saxophone screeched at odd intervals, and the piano sounded out of place. It was as if they were trying to improvise in ways that were intentionally jarring. Guests started exchanging confused glances, but no one said anything. It wasn't until Sarah walked into the room, with that look of pure excitement on her face, that everything went south. She froze in the doorway, her smile slowly fading. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the band. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of the music. "This isn't jazz." I panicked. "I don't know, Sarah. It's supposed to be jazz, but, maybe they're doing something avant-garde? It's probably part of the vibe?" She was still staring at the band in disbelief. Then, before I could stop her, she marched up to the bandleader and asked, "What are you playing? This is not what I paid for." Dave, looking completely unfazed, simply shrugged and said, "Well, this is what we do. You hired us for jazz, but this is modern jazz, if you will. A bit more experimental." It hit me all at once: I had booked the wrong band. They weren't a jazz band at all. They were an avant-garde experimental group that dabbled in jazz but had no real grasp of it. They were just terrible. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. Sarah was livid. She turned to me, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "What did you do? You promised me live jazz. This is a joke." I tried to salvage the moment by offering to call the band off and get a DJ instead, but that only made things worse. Sarah, now visibly upset, grabbed her coat and said, "I can't do this." She stormed out of the venue, and half the guests followed her, leaving the remaining ones awkwardly standing around, unsure of what to do. I was left standing in the middle of a half-empty venue with the band still playing their weird sounds, unsure of how to fix the wreckage I had caused. Later that evening, Sarah texted me, saying she was really disappointed and didn't want to talk about it right now. We haven't spoken much since, and I feel like I've lost a little bit of our friendship because of this disaster. So, to anyone planning a surprise for a friend, remember, do your homework. And when you think you've done enough research, do it again. And never, never book a band just because their website looks fancy. It's been a few days now, and I can still hear that awful saxophone screeching in my head. Never again. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.